Star Wars The Mandalorian and Grogu is a 2026 American action-adventure science fiction drama film. It is scheduled for release in theater on the 22nd of May 2026. It runs for 2 hours and 12 minutes. It is rated PG-13 for action and violence. It was directed by Jon Favreau, the same man who created the original television series on Disney Plus back in 2019. The screenplay was written by Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni, and Noah Clore. The film was produced by Lucasfilm and distributed by Walt Disney Studios Motion Pictures. It played in theaters worldwide, including IMAX screens, and it represents the first theatrical Star Wars release since The Rise of Skywalker came out in December 2019. The story is set following the fall of the Galactic Empire, and in the film, Djarin and his apprentice Grogu are enlisted by the New Republic to rescue Rotta the Hutt in exchange for information on a target. The main cast includes Pedro Pascal as Djarin, the man behind the Mandalorian helmet. Sigourney Weaver plays Colonel Ward, a New Republic officer with a strong military background. Jeremy Allen White, the star of the television series The Bear, provides the voice for Rotta the Hutt, the son of the famous crime lord Jabba the Hutt. Johnny Coyne plays an imperial warlord named Janu. And in a fun surprise, legendary film director Martin Scorsese provides his voice as Hugo Durant, an Armenian fry cook who appears in the story. The score was composed by Ludwig Göransson, who created the iconic Mandalorian theme music that most people would recognize immediately. The music was recorded in January 2026 at the Fox Studio lot in Los Angeles. The film premiered at the TCL Chinese Theatre in Los Angeles on the 14th of May 2026 before opening widely to the public on May 22. Now, before we go into everything else, let us spend a moment talking about why this movie even exists. Why is it a movie and not a fourth season of the television show? The Mandalorian television show ran for 3 seasons on Disney Plus. The first season came out in 2019 and was a massive cultural phenomenon. Baby Yoda, who is actually named Grogu, became one of the most popular characters in the history of pop culture almost overnight. The show ran through seasons 2 and 3, and by the time season 3 ended in 2023, Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni had already written scripts for a fourth season. That fourth season was going to be a big one. It was going to feature Grand Admiral Thrawn as a major villain. It was going to connect deeply to the Ahsoka television series. It was going to be a major part of this whole era of Star Wars storytelling. But then something changed. There were Hollywood labor strikes in 2023 that pushed many productions back. There were also big conversations happening inside Disney and Lucasfilm about the future of Star Wars. Disney CEO Bob Iger announced during an earnings call in early 2024 that instead of a fourth television season, the next chapter of Din Djarin and Grogu's story would be told as a theatrical movie releasing in 2026. Favreau said the planned fourth season would have featured many characters, was centered on Grand Admiral Thrawn and the larger storyline of this era of Star Wars, and would have set up the events of the second season of Ahsoka. He said changing from a television series to a film forced him to create a new story, though he was still able to explore the idea of Grogu being the Mandalorian's apprentice and some references to the wider universe which had been planned for the fourth season. Favreau said the film's story is less reliant on material from the previous seasons to accommodate audiences who had not watched the series. So the decision was made. The fourth season was set aside. A brand new story was written, and Jon Favreau stepped up not just as a producer and writer but as the actual director of the feature film. This is a big deal because Favreau has directed major Hollywood movies before. He directed the original Iron Man in 2008. He directed Chef. He directed the live-action remake of The Lion King. He knows how to make a big movie. And now he was bringing all of that experience to the galaxy far, far away. The film was shot entirely in California, which is actually a historic first for a Star Wars theatrical film. The state gave the production more than $21 million in tax credits, one of the biggest allocations in California's filming tax credit program ever. The production was expected to generate over $166 million in wages and production spending in the state. Principal photography began in June 2024 and ran for about 92 days, with approximately 54 cast members, 3,500 background extras, and 500 crew members. To really understand and feel this movie properly, you need to know a little bit about where Din Djarin and Grogu came from. So let us take a few minutes to talk about their journey. In the very first episode of The Mandalorian back in 2019, we met Din Djarin. He was a bounty hunter, a man of few words, hidden completely behind a Mandalorian helmet made of a special metal called Beskar. He did not show his face to anyone. He did not make friends. He took jobs, collected his payment, and moved on. He was a lone wolf in the truest sense of the word. Then he received a mysterious job from an Imperial Remnant client. He had to find a target identified only by their species and age. The target was 50 years old. When Djarin tracked down this target, he discovered it was a small green creature, a baby, sitting in a floating cradle. This tiny being looked like a baby version of Yoda, the legendary Jedi Master from the original Star Wars trilogy. The internet went absolutely insane. People called this creature Baby Yoda before anyone even knew his real name. His actual name, revealed much later, is Grogu. Din Djarin turned Grogu over to the Imperial client, collected his money, and was supposed to walk away. But he could not do it. Something in him broke. He went back, rescued Grogu, and from that moment forward, everything changed. Over the course of 3 seasons, we watched these two characters form one of the most unlikely and heartwarming bonds in all of Star Wars history. A tough bounty hunter who never showed his face, never let anyone in, who lived by a strict code called the Way of the Mandalore, and a tiny force-sensitive child who could barely walk but could somehow lift objects with his mind, could slow down incoming threats with the force, and could make people's hearts melt just by blinking his enormous dark eyes. It was later revealed that young Grogu was inside the Jedi Temple on Coruscant during the execution of Order 66. Protected by several Jedi amid the attacking of the clones, Grogu was whisked away to safety by Jedi Master Kelleran Beak and hidden from the emerging Empire. Grogu survived the near total destruction of the Jedi Order. He spent decades in hiding, and then he ended up as a bounty in Din Djarin's hands, and Din Djarin chose to protect him. By the end of the third season of The Mandalorian, a lot had happened. Moff Gideon, the main villain who had been hunting Grogu, was defeated. The Mandalorian people reclaimed their home planet of Mandalore, which had been devastated and abandoned for years. Din Djarin had established a home for himself and Grogu on the planet Nevarro, a volcanic world that had become a surprisingly thriving community. Grogu had also made a very important choice earlier in the Book of Boba Fett, a spin off show. He had been training with Luke Skywalker as a Jedi, but he chose to leave that path and return to Din Djarin. He chose family over the Jedi Order. So by the time the movie begins, Grogu is not exactly a Jedi. He is something new. He is the Mandalorian's apprentice. He is learning the way of the Mandalore while also having Force abilities. He is a bridge between two ancient traditions. And Din Djarin himself had made a deal. After helping reclaim Mandalore, he agreed to work with the New Republic, the government that replaced the Empire after its fall. He would use his skills as a bounty hunter and warrior to help the New Republic hunt down remaining Imperial threats. He told his New Republic contacts that he was ready to work for their cause. This is where the movie picks up. Before we walk through the story, let us appreciate what this film represents from a bigger picture perspective. Star Wars is one of the biggest franchises in the history of entertainment. George Lucas created the original film in 1977 and it changed cinema forever. The franchise continued through sequels, prequels, animated shows, video games, and theme parks. When Disney bought Lucasfilm in 2012 for over $4 billion, they immediately began making new Star Wars movies. There was a sequel trilogy from 2015 to 2019. There were spin-off films like Rogue One and Solo. But by the time The Rise of Skywalker came out in 2019, there was a real sense of fatigue. The final film in the sequel trilogy received mixed reviews and divided fans sharply. Disney went quiet on the theatrical Star Wars front. Meanwhile, on streaming, things were actually going well. The Mandalorian had revived enthusiasm for the franchise. It was intimate, focused, and built around characters people genuinely loved. But even the streaming shows had stumbled a bit by 2023, with season 3 of The Mandalorian receiving more mixed reactions than the first two. So when The Mandalorian and Grogu was announced as a theatrical film, many people asked whether this was a smart move. Was there still an appetite for Star Wars on the big screen? Would casual fans who had not watched all 3 seasons of the show feel lost? Would hardcore fans feel like this was just a fancy television episode? Filoni described the film as a big celebration of the title characters. He said it did not have the same pressure as The Force Awakens, which was similarly the first Star Wars film in years, because it was not the start of a new trilogy or introducing new characters. That is an important point. Favreau and Filoni were not trying to reinvent Star Wars or set up some grand new mythology. They were making a movie about two characters people already loved. The goal was celebration, adventure, and fun. Whether they achieved that goal is something we will discuss in depth throughout this script. The film opens in a way that immediately signals it means business. We are not eased in slowly. There is no long establishing crawl through space. Within the very first minutes of the film, we are thrown into action. Set a year after the Empire's defeat in Return of the Jedi, the new movie starts with what could have been the blowout ending of a Disney Plus season finale, with the blaster-slinging bounty hunter busting up a hive of Imperial holdouts and destroying two AT-ATs. AT-ATs, for anyone who might not know, are those enormous four-legged armored walking vehicles that you might remember from the Battle of Hutt in The Empire Strikes Back. They are massive, powerful, and deeply symbolic of the Empire's military might. Seeing them destroyed in the opening scene is a statement. The Empire is falling apart. Their greatest weapons are being dismantled. But the job is not finished yet. The movie launches into a series of action sequences that see Din, Djarin, and Grogu at their absolute best, working as the ultimate duo to take down the bad guys. Both Din's Mandalorian fighting skills and Grogu's increasing force powers are thrilling, and the scenes only become all the more captivating with IMAX friendly explosions and massive AT-ATs being taken down. Right from the start, the movie is telling you something important about how these two characters have grown. This is not the Din Djarin of season 1 who was a lone wolf doing everything by himself. And this is not the Grogu who mostly sat in his hover pram looking cute while Mando saved everyone. These two are a team now, a genuine fighting duo. The protected has become a protector alongside the protector. Grogu is using his force abilities actively in combat. He is not just a passenger on this journey anymore, he is a partner. After this explosive opening sequence, Din and Grogu return to what has become their base of operations, working with the New Republic. This new adventure begins much like a James Bond film, seeing our titular characters fulfilling their current mission before meeting Colonel Ward, played by Sigourney Weaver, for details of their next assignment. Colonel Ward. This is a character worth talking about for a moment before we move forward in the story. At Star Wars Celebration Japan 2025, Jon Favreau shared that Sigourney Weaver's character is named Colonel Ward and she fought in the rebellion. So this is not some bureaucrat who rose through New Republic ranks. This is someone who was in the trenches, someone who fought the Empire directly, who put her life on the line during the Galactic Civil War. She has seen real combat. She knows what these Imperial remnants are capable of. And now she is in a leadership position in the New Republic's Adelphi Rangers, a group of fighters stationed in the Outer Rim territories whose job is to hunt down these scattered Imperial holdouts before they can regroup. The evil empire has fallen, and Imperial warlords remain scattered throughout the galaxy. As the fledgling New Republic works to protect everything the rebellion fought for, they have enlisted the help of legendary Mandalorian bounty hunter Din Djarin and his young apprentice Grogu. So this is the world as the movie sees it. The big war is over. The Emperor is dead. Darth Vader is dead. But the galaxy is not peaceful. Far from it. There are still Imperial officers and commanders out there, warlords who refuse to accept defeat, who still have troops and resources and ambitions. They are scattered, but they are dangerous. They are like embers after a fire, and if nobody stamps them out, those embers can start a new blaze. This is the mission that Colonel Ward assigns to Din Djarin. She gives him the details of the next job, and it is a complicated one. Here is the situation. The New Republic has a target they need to locate. A high-ranking Imperial figure whose whereabouts are unknown, referred to as Commander Coin. Getting information on where Coin is hiding is a priority for the New Republic, but the Republic does not have that information themselves. The people who might have it are the Hutts. The Hutt clan, the crime syndicate that controlled large parts of the criminal underworld for decades under Jabba the Hutt's leadership, has its own network of contacts and informants spread across the galaxy. They hear things, they know things. If anyone would know where an elusive Imperial commander is hiding, it might be the Hutts. But the Hutts do not just hand over information for free, they want something in return, and what they want is quite specific. They want their family member back. Mando is assigned his next task by Colonel Ward: travel to the home planet of Jabba the Hutt and rescue Jabba's son Rotta the Hutt, who is being held hostage there. So the mission is essentially a rescue operation. Go into Hutt territory, locate Rotta, extract him safely, bring him back to his family, and in exchange, the Hutt clan will tell the New Republic where Commander Coin is. Simple enough in theory. But of course, nothing in the Star Wars galaxy is ever simple in practice. All of which feels fishy for Mando, considering he is trying to use his skills only for good now. He does not feel right going back to his old ways, but Ward persuades him to. This is actually one of the more interesting character beats in the opening act. Din Djarin has changed. He is not purely a mercenary anymore. He has a code now. Not just the Mandalorian code about not removing your helmet, but a deeper personal code about what he will and will not do. He spent years protecting Grogu. He helped reclaim Mandalore. He aligned himself with people who are trying to do good things. And now he is being asked to wade back into criminal underworld territory, dealing with the Hutts, navigating a world of crime and corruption in order to get information for the Republic. There is something uncomfortable about this for Djarin. It blurs lines. It makes him feel like the old bounty hunter he used to be, taking dirty jobs for questionable clients. But Ward is convincing. The target matters, stopping Imperial remnants from rebuilding matters, and this is the only path available right now. Djarin agrees. He and Grogu are going to the Hutt homeworld. One of the things that is genuinely exciting about watching this movie is the scale of the world building. The television show, great as it was, had natural limitations in terms of budget and scope. Every episode could only go so far, but this is a feature film with a massive budget and the full resources of Lucasfilm and ILM behind it. So the journey that Din and Grogu take across this movie visits multiple distinct and visually striking planets. The action is almost non-stop, jumping from the planets of Hoth to Adelphi, Nalhutta, Shakari, and Nevarro in the first 80 minutes. Let us talk about these locations for a moment because they matter to the story and to the feel of the film. Hoth is a planet that every Star Wars fan knows. It is the ice planet from The Empire Strikes Back. Seeing it again in a live action context, even briefly, is a thrill. It connects this film directly to the broader Star Wars mythology without feeling like cheap nostalgia. There is a reason to be here. The Imperial remnants, scattered and desperate, sometimes operate from old, forgotten bases in remote locations. Ice worlds like Hoth are perfect hiding spots. Cold, inhospitable, far from the center of the New Republic's reach. Adelphi appears to be the base of operations for Colonel Ward and her rangers. It is where Djarin gets his briefing. It is the professional, military side of this story. Clean lines, Republic insignia, people in uniform making plans and giving orders. Then there is Nalhutta. This is the Hutt homeworld, and seeing it rendered in live action is something that Star Wars fans have waited a long, long time for. It was awesome to see the Hutt homeworld of Nalhutta in a live action Star Wars movie, and it looked exactly the way I wanted it to. Nalhutta is not a beautiful planet. It is swampy, dark, and grimy. It smells, if you can smell through a screen. It is the kind of place where deals are made in shadows, where creatures of dubious morality do business, where the law of the New Republic barely reaches. It is the center of Hutt power and Hutt culture. And given that Jabba the Hutt was one of the most iconic characters in the original trilogy, seeing his home world fully realized for the first time in live action is genuinely exciting for long-time fans. Shakari is where we first meet Rotta the Hutt properly and where we encounter Hugo Durant, the fry cook voiced by Martin Scorsese. It has a more exotic, nightlife heavy atmosphere with gladiatorial combat elements that we will discuss in more detail when we get to that part of the story. And Nevarro, Din, and Grogu's home appears as well. It serves as an anchor point, a reminder of what these characters are fighting to protect. Rotta the Hutt is not a new character in Star Wars lore. He actually appeared way back in the 2008 animated film The Clone Wars, which served as a theatrical release and then led to the beloved animated television series of the same name. In that story, Rotta was a young Hutt child and Anakin Skywalker and Ahsoka Tano were involved in his rescue. He was Jabba's son, kidnapped and used as a pawn. At that point, he was small, helpless, and young. That was many years ago in the Star Wars timeline. Now, in the time of the Mandalorian and Grogu, set several years after Return of the Jedi, Rotta has grown up. And he has grown up in a very interesting direction. Unlike previous Hutts, Rotta is a physical threat who participates in gladiator-style fights. Favreau compared him to Adonis Creed from the Creed films, saying both characters live in the shadow of their famous fathers. This is a fascinating creative choice. Most Hutts in Star Wars are enormous, slow-moving slug creatures who rely on wealth, influence, and minions to exercise power. Jabba was the perfect example of this. He sat on his throne, surrounded by guards and entertainers, pulling strings from a position of absolute comfort. He was physically formidable in his sheer size, but not a hand to hand fighter. Rotta has gone a completely different direction. He is big, yes, but he is muscular. He trains, he fights, he competes in gladiatorial combat arenas. He is not content to sit on a throne and rule through fear and money. He wants to prove himself through action, through physical power, through his own achievements, rather than simply inheriting his father's empire. Voiced by Jeremy Allen White, Rotta is a standout in the film, both for the presence he brings to the action and unexpected heart he brings to the story. As Jabba the Hutt's son, Rotta undergoes an arc that can be best compared to Adonis Creed in the Creed trilogy as. Like Michael B. Jordan's boxer character, Rotta wants to forge a legacy of his own beyond what the galaxy thinks of his father. This is brilliant writing, honestly. The Creed parallel is exactly right. Adonis Creed was the son of Apollo Creed, a boxing legend. His entire life was defined by that name, by that legacy, and by the constant question of whether he was his father's son or his own man. He fought not just other fighters but the weight of his family's reputation. Rotta the Hutt is living the same story in a galaxy far, far away. Jabba was one of the most powerful and feared crime lords in the galaxy. His name meant something. His palace on Tatooine was a monument to his power. His connection spanned the criminal underworld. And then he died, killed by Princess Leia with a chain around his neck. What does that legacy mean for his son? How do you step out from under a shadow that enormous? By the time Djarin finds Rotta, he is being held captive. He is a prisoner, a hostage, used by whoever holds him as leverage against the Hutt clan. But Rotta is not a passive prisoner. He is fighting. He is in gladiatorial arenas, forced to compete, and he is not losing. The Mandalorian and Grogu take on an assignment to free Jabba the Hutt's son from captivity. The gladiatorial sequence is one of the film's most visually striking set pieces. It draws inspiration from classic sword and sandal films, from Roman gladiator stories, from the kind of arena combat entertainment that brutal societies throughout history have used to keep their populations entertained and their captives controlled. In the Star Wars universe, this kind of entertainment exists in the criminal underworld. It is the dark mirror of the galaxy's more civilized sporting events. Watching Din Djarin navigate this environment is fascinating. He is a warrior, yes, but he is also a professional. He does not come in guns blazing. He assesses the situation. He looks for the angle. He considers how to extract Rotta without starting a war he cannot win. And then there is Grogu. Grogu in this environment is both a source of humor and genuine capability. He uses his force abilities in clever ways. He is small enough to go places Din cannot. He is underestimated by virtually every enemy they face. And he is eating things, because that is what Grogu does. At any opportunity, he will attempt to consume whatever living creature is nearby. Grogu swallows insects and fish-like things whole. There is also Hugo Durant in this section of the film. He is voiced by Martin Scorsese and is described as an Ardennian fry cook. The Ardennians, for those who remember the Solo, a Star Wars story film, are the species that Rio Durant belonged to. They are small, four-armed creatures, and apparently Scorsese's Durant runs some kind of food establishment in this world, connected to the criminal networks that surround the gladiatorial operations. It is a small role, but seeing Martin Scorsese's name in a Star Wars cast list is absolutely wild and delightful. The rescue of Rotta involves a classic Star Wars adventure structure. There are disguises and deceptions. There are moments where things go according to plan and moments where they decidedly do not. There are action sequences in tight corridors, in open spaces, in the arena itself. A massive underwater serpent swallows two beings and poisons another. The victim sports a bloody, increasingly grotesque wound that clearly saps his strength and energy, and he ultimately succumbs and sinks into unconsciousness. This is where the PG-13 rating earns its keep. The The film does not shy away from danger being real. When characters are hurt, they really suffer. When the serpent attacks, it is genuinely threatening and disturbing in a way that younger children might find overwhelming, but that older viewers will appreciate as actual dramatic stakes. The giant serpent sequence in the swampy terrain of Nalhutta is one of the film's creature feature highlights. There is a real Ray Harryhausen quality to it. That old school monster movie energy of a massive creature from the deep emerging to terrorize our heroes. One of the movie's strong points is that across its many wordless scenes, it is at heart a solidly rousing, delightfully icky creature feature in the vein of a supercharged Ray Harryhausen meets Goo. Jon Favreau clearly loves classic monster movies and adventure cinema. You can feel it in how the creature sequences are staged. They are not just spectacle for spectacle's sake. They create genuine tension and give both Din and Grogu moments to shine in their specific complementary ways. Eventually, Rotta is extracted. Din Djarin completes the first part of his mission. Rotta the Hutt is free. And now, according to the deal, the Hutt clan should provide the information the New Republic needs. The location of Commander Coin. But of course, things are never that simple. Q double crosses and ulterior motives, as almost no one can be trusted on this job, whereas Rotta the Hutt is doomed no matter where he ends up. This is where the middle section of the film gets its dramatic fuel. The deal with the Hutts was never quite as straightforward as it seemed. The Hutt clan is a criminal organization. Their word means something within their word's rules, but those rules have loopholes. The people holding Rotta captive had their own agenda. Commander Coin is not just a random imperial fugitive. There are layers to this. The film adds further complexity through the character of the Imperial warlord Janu, played by Johnny Coin, who has appeared in this role before during The Mandalorian's third season on television. In mid-December 2024, Johnny Coin was revealed to be reprising his role as the Imperial warlord Janu from the third season of The Mandalorian. This continuity matters. Janu is not a new face. Viewers who watched the show will recognize him and understand his history. He is not just following orders. He has his own ambitions, his own ideology, his own burning conviction that the Empire's values were right and that the galaxy made a mistake in rejecting them. He is the kind of villain who genuinely believes he is the hero of his own story. He is not simply evil for evil's sake. He is dangerous because he is convinced. The connection between Janu and Rotta's captivity gradually becomes clearer. The Imperial remnants are not just hiding and surviving, they are making moves. Rotta was not kidnapped randomly. There was a strategic reason for holding him. Information that the Hutts possess, the same information the New Republic wants, could be used by the Imperials just as easily. In fact, if the Imperials could use Rotta as leverage to either gain information from the Hutts or prevent the Hutts from cooperating with the New Republic, that would serve their purposes perfectly. So what begins as a rescue mission becomes something more tangled. Din Djarin is now navigating a three-way conflict. The New Republic wants information, the Hutts want their family member back. The Imperials want to prevent the New Republic from getting what they need, and everyone is willing to use everyone else to get what they want. Din Djarin is in the middle of all of this, and it is wearing on him. There is a powerful undercurrent throughout the second act of the film about what it means to be a tool. Din Djarin is being used by the New Republic as an instrument. He is effective, yes, he gets results. But does being an instrument of the Republic make him any different from being an instrument of the Imperial client he worked for in the very first episode of The Mandalorian? He took a job then without knowing the full story and nearly let Grogu come to harm. Now he is taking jobs from what are supposed to be the good guys. But the good guys are using deals with criminals to pursue their objectives. They are making compromises. They are getting their hands dirty. Does the end justify the means? Is helping the New Republic, even in morally complicated ways, worth it because the alternative, an imperial resurgence, would be so much worse? These questions hover over the story even when the film is most focused on action and spectacle. A particularly notable sequence, mentioned in several reviews, involves Grogu wandering alone through a forest area on one of the planets. One segment in particular sees Grogu wandering around some woods trying to accomplish a goal, starting as fan service that might transcend the notion, only to slog on for no reason other than the diehards might be loving the setting. Some critics found this sequence too long, others found it magical. This is one of those moments in the film that divides opinion sharply along the lines of whether you are a deeply invested Star Wars fan or a more casual viewer. For fans who know the lore, who understand what certain settings and references mean in the broader Star Wars universe, this sequence is emotionally resonant and filled with meaning. For casual viewers, it might feel like a digression. Without getting into specific spoilers about exactly what Grogu is doing or where this forest is, the sequence speaks to something important about his character. Grogu has a dual nature. He is a Mandalorian apprentice. He is also force sensitive, connected to the living energy of the universe in ways that few beings are. There are moments where his Jedi nature and his Mandalorian path align perfectly. And there are moments where he needs to walk his own road, finding his own understanding of who and what he is. This forest walk appears to be one of those moments. It also connects to a theme that the film keeps returning to, the theme of children finding their own way beyond their parents' shadows. Rotta the Hutt wants to be more than Jabba's son. Grogu chose not to be Luke Skywalker's student and decided to walk a new path. Djarin himself came from foundling origins, raised by Mandalorian warriors after his own parents were killed in Imperial raids. He built his identity from the traditions of people who took him in. None of these characters are simply the products of their origins. They are all making choices about who to become. Let us pause the plot walkthrough for a moment and spend some time really examining the relationship at the center of this film. Because without understanding and feeling the bond between Din Djarin and Grogu, the movie simply does not work. All the action sequences and plot mechanics are just backdrop. The emotional core is this father and son. What makes their relationship so unusual and so moving is precisely how much it had to overcome to become what it is. Din Djarin, when we first met him, was not someone who let people in. He was not unkind. He was professional. He operated within a strict code, but he was fundamentally alone. The Mandalorian creed that he followed, specifically the Coward's Creed, included a rule about never removing the helmet. This was not just a tradition for Djarin, it was almost literal. By keeping his face hidden, he kept a wall between himself and the rest of the galaxy. He was present but unreachable. Grogu broke through that wall in the simplest and most powerful possible way. He needed care, he needed protection. He was tiny and vulnerable and in danger. And something in Din Djarin responded to that need at a level deeper than his professional code. What followed was a slow, beautiful, often wordless story of a father learning how to be a father. Din Djarin did not know how to raise a child. He had never done it. He barely knew how to have a conversation with another person that lasted more than 3 sentences. And yet, episode after episode, season after season, we watched him figure it out. We watched him make mistakes and learn from them. We watched him sacrifice everything repeatedly for this small creature who could not even tell him thank you. And Grogu. The mystery of where he came from, what he was capable of, was parceled out slowly across the television seasons. But the mystery was always secondary to the emotional truth, which was that this tiny being who had survived incredible trauma as a child, who had been hidden and alone for most of his long life, had found someone who wanted him, who chose him. A line from the final CinemaCon trailer, the old protect the young and then the young protect the old, now appears to foreshadow Grogu stepping into a more active role during the rescue mission after Din is captured. That line is the emotional thesis of the entire movie, and honestly, of the entire Mandalorian story going back to episode 1 of the show. The whole journey has been moving toward a moment where Grogu is no longer just the one being protected, where he becomes the protector, where the student becomes capable enough to save the teacher. The film toys with some interesting ideas about the protected becoming the protector and children outliving their parents. It is a shame that these themes were not explored a little more deeply, but there is hope that future stories will use the work done in this film as a foundation for further examination. Grogu saving Din Djarin is a moment of enormous emotional weight when it comes in the film. The scene where Din is captured and Grogu must act without guidance, relying on his own courage and abilities rather than following Mando's lead, is the kind of moment that this entire story has been building toward for years. It is not just about action, it is about a child growing up, about becoming someone who can protect the people they love. And there is something deeply meaningful about the specific nature of Grogu's power. He uses the Force, he uses abilities that connect him to the Jedi tradition. But he is doing it in service of Mandalorian values, in service of loyalty, protection, family, and the foundling's bond. He is not using the Force to become a powerful Jedi warrior fighting for galactic peace in the abstract. He is using it to save his dad. That is the perfect distillation of who Grogu is and what his hybrid identity means. The relationship between Rotta, the Hutt, and Grogu also adds another layer to this theme. Rotta's arc fits seamlessly into the core theme of The Mandalorian, dating back to Season 1, Episode 1, which is fatherhood. Rotta, having grown up without a father figure in any meaningful sense, who lived in his famous dead father's massive shadow, connects with Grogu in ways that neither of them quite understands at first. They are both beings defined by complicated family histories. They are both trying to figure out who they are beyond where they came from. And there is the occasional gesture toward a potentially touching moment as Rotta views Grogu as a kindred spirit. The fact that Rotta, for all his physical toughness and gladiatorial muscle, can recognize something of himself in this tiny green, force sensitive creature is one of the film's most quietly affecting character moments. It does not turn into a deep friendship. The film does not have time for that, but the flicker of recognition is there and it gives the rescue mission an unexpected emotional texture. The third act of The Mandalorian and Grogu brings all of the story's threads together in a way that is satisfying, if not entirely surprising. After the complications and double crosses of the middle section, the mission comes down to a direct confrontation. Early exposition provided by Sigourney Weaver's Colonel Ward suggests that the film will unravel a mystery involving the elusive Commander Coin, although these questions are answered predictably and underwhelmingly. The Commander Coin storyline, the original intelligence objective that sent Din and Grogu on this mission, does get resolved, but several critics have noted that the resolution is fairly conventional. The mystery of who Coin is and where Coin is hiding does not deliver a major twist or revelation that reshapes the entire story. It is completed in a workmanlike way that ties the plot together but does not elevate it to something memorable on its own terms. The real climax of the film is emotional rather than simply plot driven. It is the confrontation between Din Djarin's crew and the Imperial forces, with Rotta's freedom as the ultimate prize and Grogu's growth as the true heart of the sequence. There is a significant action set piece here that brings together the film's various visual and action elements. A stop motion action sequence engineered by Phil Tippett makes for delightfully old school fun. Phil Tippett is a legendary visual effects artist who worked on the original Star Wars trilogy. He is the person responsible for the original AT-AT movements in The Empire Strikes Back, among many other classic creations. Having him contribute a stop motion sequence to this film is a beautiful act of continuity and respect for Star Wars history. It creates a visual moment that feels genuinely different from the CGI heavy action that surrounds it, with a textural quality and weight that digital effects alone cannot quite replicate. It is the film saying, openly and joyfully, that it loves where it comes from. The final battle sequence involves space combat, ground combat, and the kind of multi front chaos that Star Wars action climaxes tend to excel at. X-Wings are involved. Blasters are firing everywhere. Grogu is doing things with the Force that we have never quite seen him do before. Djarin is fighting with a ferocity and efficiency that underlines just how completely different he is from the man we met in season 1. The Mandalorian warrior, who was always formidable, has become something close to unstoppable, more reminiscent, as one reviewer noted, of dark side fighters like Asajj Ventress than the more restrained version of Mando that audiences might have expected. Mando, who was already a great fighter in The Mandalorian, has become a next level combatant. He is more reminiscent of cutthroat Star Wars assassins like Asajj Ventress than the toned down, newly adoptive dad that some audiences might be expecting. This is a significant character note. Djarin has not softened because he has a family. In some ways, he has become harder, more dangerous because he has something to protect. Love has not made him gentle. It has made him more focused, more determined, more willing to do whatever is necessary to keep Grogu safe and to defeat the forces that threaten their world. The resolution of the Rotta storyline is perhaps the most emotionally satisfying part of the climax. Rotta, who began the film as a captive, who proved himself throughout as a physical fighter of real ability, gets a moment that feels genuinely earned. His arc of proving himself beyond his father's name reaches its culmination. It is not a perfect arc, and some critics felt it was underdeveloped. But the intention is clear and the emotional beat lands. We get hand to hand fight scenes, X-Wing fighters, explosions, and lots of cool monsters. Is it aimed at a young audience? Yes. But even at 48 years of age, as soon as a Star Wars movie begins, I cannot help but become 8 years old again. That feeling is real. Jon Favreau understood something fundamental when he made both the television show and this movie. Star Wars at its best is not complicated. It is not trying to be Shakespeare. It is trying to capture the feeling of adventure, of good versus evil, of small beings doing extraordinary things against impossible odds. It is trying to make you feel the way you felt the first time you saw those stars and that ship and heard that music. The ending of the film brings Din and Grogu back to Nevarro, back to their home. The mission is complete. The Hutts have their family member back. The New Republic has its intelligence. The Imperial threat in this corner of the galaxy has been addressed. Not permanently, not galaxy changing, but meaningfully. And Din and Grogu are together. Still the clan of two, still father and son. The film ends on a note that is warm rather than epic. This is not the ending of Return of the Jedi, where the whole galaxy is celebrating freedom. This is smaller than that, more personal. Two beings, one made of iron and pain and fierce love, one tiny and green and full of force and wonder, choosing each other, choosing home. There is a deliberately open quality to where the story leaves these characters. Their work is not finished. The Imperial remnants are not fully defeated. The galaxy remains complicated and dangerous. But for this moment, on this night, on Nevarro, everything is okay. The sequel, Dave Filoni's untitled Mandalorian movie, is noted as a follow-up production. So this film is explicitly the first chapter of something larger. Dave Filoni, who co-wrote this film and recently became co-CEO of Lucasfilm, is already developing the next chapter of this story. And that next film, presumably, will deal with the larger threads that this movie deliberately sets up but does not resolve. The Imperial remnants are still out there, larger threads are still looming. The galaxy is still moving toward whatever the Force Awakens era will eventually bring. This film exists in a specific temporal window between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens, and it is content to occupy that window without rushing toward either end. It is not trying to set up the sequel trilogy. It is not trying to bring in Kylo Ren or Rey or any of that. It is its own story, in its own moment, and that restraint is actually one of its genuine strengths. There is one element of Grogu's journey in this film that deserves its own extended discussion, and that is the subject of Beskar armor. For anyone who has followed The Mandalorian closely, Beskar is not just a material. It is not simply a metal that happens to be very strong and resistant to lightsaber strikes and blaster bolts. Beskar is identity. It is history. It is culture made physical. It is the single most important symbol in Mandalorian tradition, and its significance echoes through every frame of every story that Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni have told in this world. Think about what Beskar means in Mandalorian culture. It is not metal, it is identity, it is an inheritance, it is the way. When a Mandalorian is given armor, they are not just receiving protection. They are being told, you belong here, you are one of us, you are real. Neo Sabers. In the first season of The Mandalorian, the very first episode, Din Djarin received Beskar as payment for delivering Grogu to an Imperial client. That Beskar, that blood money, if you want to think about it that way, was immediately taken to the armorer of the covert, the Mandalorian forge worker who creates and maintains the armor of her people, and she used it to forge new armor for Djarin. She did not question where it came from. She understood what it was for: armor, protection, identity. Then, later in that same season, after the horror of the attack on the covert and the burning of their hiding place, Djarin returned with more Beskar, enough to forge a complete full set of armor for himself. And in a moment that carried enormous emotional weight without a single word of dialogue, we watched that armor being made piece by piece, shaped in fire, cooled, and hammered into the form of a Mandalorian warrior shell. That armor is Din Djarin in a very real sense. He never shows his face. He never shows his body. What the galaxy sees when it sees him is that silver Beskar suit. That is who he is to everyone he meets. It is his public self, his professional self, his protected self. The armor keeps him safe, but it also keeps him hidden. And for years, keeping himself hidden was how he survived. Now think about Grogu being given Beskar armor. In Book of Boba Fett episode 6, Luke Skywalker gave Grogu a choice: stay and train to become a Jedi, or return to Din Djarin. Grogu chose Din. He is not a Jedi. He is a Mando foundling who happens to have Force powers. This distinction shapes everything about his arc in the 2026 film, including the fact that he is getting Beskar armor, not a saber, CC sabers, not a lightsaber, not the weapon of a Jedi Knight, not the tool of the order he was trained in as a child at the Jedi Temple before Order 66 destroyed everything, not the elegant weapon of a more civilized age, as Ben Kenobi described it: armor, Mandalorian armor, Beskar. This is Grogu saying, with the language of action rather than words, because Grogu never uses words, that this is who I am, this is where I belong, this family, this tradition, this person who chose me, this is my way. And the film apparently continues this thread in meaningful ways. The trailers confirm Grogu already has some Beskar of his own at this point. Whether the film gives him a full suit is still an open question. But the direction is clear. His future is not the Jedi Temple on a distant planet. His future is right next to Din Djarin, armor on, flying the Razor Crest across whatever the New Republic needs them to do next. Neo Sabers. There is something genuinely moving about this. Grogu spent the early years of his life, decades of it, in hiding, hidden from the Empire, hidden from hunters, hidden in secret. He survived by being invisible, by being unknown. His very existence was a secret that could get him killed. And now, step by step, piece by piece of Beskar at a time, he is becoming visible. He is saying, here I am, this is my name, this is my clan, try to come for me if you want, but I will not hide anymore. The armor is not just protection, it is a declaration. Since we are talking about Beskar and Mandalorian traditions, it is worth addressing something that significant fans of the series will immediately notice about this film. The Darksaber is not in it, and that absence is actually enormously significant. The Darksaber was the central MacGuffin, the symbolic object of seasons 2 and 3 of the Mandalorian television show. It was a unique lightsaber with a flat black blade, the only one of its kind in the Star Wars universe. It was forged over 1,000 years before the events of the show by a Mandalorian warrior who had also become a Jedi Knight. It became the symbol of Mandalorian leadership, the weapon of the person who could claim the right to rule Mandalore. Din Djarin won it in combat during season 2. He did not want it. He did not ask for it. He did not know what it meant politically. But in Mandalorian tradition, it was his because he had won it in honorable combat, and the political complications that followed from that accidental claim of the Darksaber drove much of the drama of season 3. The Darksaber was permanently destroyed in the season 3 finale during the Battle of Mandalore. Bo-Katan Craze was wielding it against Moff Gideon's Beskar armored Praetorian guards when the hilt shattered. This was the first canonical destruction of the Darksaber in Star Wars history. Din Djarin now carries a Beskar short sword in the 2026 film instead. CC Sabers, the Darksaber is gone, destroyed. For the first time in 1,000 years of Mandalorian history, the symbol of Mandalorian leadership does not exist. And the implications of that for the future of Mandalore and Mandalorian politics are interesting to think about. Without the Darksaber, the question of who leads Mandalore becomes more open, more democratic in a way. There is no single legendary weapon that confers legitimate authority. Leadership will have to be claimed through other means, through consensus, through strength, through wisdom. It removes one of the old certainties of Mandalorian tradition and opens a more uncertain but potentially more evolved future. Din Djarin, who never wanted to be king of Mandalore in any sense, must feel some relief at this. He carries a Beskar short sword now, a practical weapon appropriate for his role as a fighter and protector. Not a symbol of political authority, just a tool, and that is who he is, a man of action, not a king. The question of Grogu's force abilities and how they relate to his Mandalorian identity is one of the most philosophically interesting aspects of the whole Mandalorian story, and it gets some treatment in this film. Grogu is extraordinarily force sensitive. The Jedi of the Republic recognized him as a very gifted youngling. Luke Skywalker himself acknowledged Grogu's potential. The Force flows through him in ways that are unusual and powerful. He has demonstrated abilities beyond what you would expect from a youngling of his apparent developmental age. But he is also 50 years old. His species ages extremely slowly. Yoda, who looked ancient and wizened at 900 years old, was still very much a young mind at 50. Grogu is psychologically a child even while his force abilities have been building and developing over those decades of existence. This creates a fascinating character dynamic. He has the raw power of a potentially great force wielder, but he also has the emotional and psychological framework of a young child. He acts on instinct and feeling rather than training and discipline. When he uses the force, it often comes from a place of fierce protective love rather than calm Jedi focus. He picks up X-Wings when he needs to. He throws things aside when the people he loves are in danger. He pushes back sea monsters when the moment demands it. The Jedi would call this dangerous. The Jedi were always concerned about emotional attachment and the way it could fuel the dark side. They trained their students to detach, to be at peace rather than driven by passion. And for most Force users, that training is probably wise. The stories of what happens when powerful Force users act purely from emotion without discipline are written in the history of the Sith and the fall of figures like Anakin Skywalker. But Grogu is different. His emotional attachments do not seem to be pulling him toward darkness. His love for Din Djarin, his fierce protectiveness, his capacity for joy and playfulness, these qualities seem to be exactly what makes his force use healthy and grounded. He is not cold, he is not detached. He is very much in the world, very much connected to the people around him. He is 50 years old. He fits in a satchel. He cannot say a single word, and he is the most important living force sensitive being in the entire Star Wars galaxy right now. Neo Sabers. That is a remarkable statement and it is worth sitting with. At the time this film is set, the Jedi Order has been nearly destroyed. Luke Skywalker is beginning his efforts to rebuild it, but that process is going slowly and with great difficulty. The few surviving Force users in the galaxy are scattered and cautious, and in the middle of all of that, there is Grogu. Young in spirit, ancient in years, deeply powerful, and completely committed to a path that is neither fully Jedi nor fully Mandalorian but something entirely new. What does Grogu represent for the future of the Force in the Star Wars universe? What kind of Force tradition might emerge from someone who combines the wisdom embedded in his Jedi training with the values and culture of the Mandalorian people? These are questions that the films and shows seem to be building toward answering over time, and they are genuinely exciting questions. The possibility of a new kind of Force tradition, one that does not require the cold emotional detachment of the old Jedi Order, one that is built on love and loyalty and community rather than denial and discipline, is one of the most interesting narrative possibilities in this entire era of Star Wars storytelling. We talked about Ludwig Göransson's score at length, and it absolutely deserves the praise it has received. But the sound design beyond the music is worth its own discussion because Star Wars as a franchise has always been a pioneer in sound. Ben Burtt, the original sound designer of Star Wars, created what became one of the most imitated and influential soundscapes in cinema history. The lightsaber hum, built from a combination of a television's electromagnetic interference and film projector motor noise. The TIE fighter scream, derived from an elephant call and a car tire on wet pavement. R2D2's bleeps and whistles, created from Bird's own voice processed through electronics. These sounds became so culturally embedded that they are now shorthand for science fiction adventure across the entire world. The Mandalorian's television run built on this legacy with its own audio signatures. The resonant clank of Beskar being struck, the specific sound of the Mandalorian jetpack igniting and cutting off, the distinctive audio flavor of the Razor Crest engines. In the film, that sonic world is expanded to theater scale for the first time. In a proper IMAX auditorium with Dolby Atmos or similar high quality sound, the film is genuinely overwhelming in the best possible way. The 80-80 sequence in the opening carries a physical weight that you feel in your chest rather than just hear with your ears. The underground creature sequences have a biological grotesqueness to their sound design that makes your skin crawl slightly even before you process what you are seeing. The space battle sequences use the three-dimensional sound positioning of modern theater audio to create a genuine sense of aircraft moving around you in space. And the quieter sounds are just as important. The soft electronic breathing of Djarin inside his helmet. The small sounds Grogu makes, the coos and chirps and low-pitched hums that communicate his emotional state without a single word. The distant sounds of words going about their lives while the main characters move through them. Sound design at this level is invisible but essential. Star Wars has a rich tradition of callbacks, cameos, and connections to other parts of its vast universe. And The Mandalorian and Grogu honors this tradition while being, according to critics and Favreau himself, less dependent on nostalgic cameos than some recent Star Wars content has been. Still, there are notable appearances beyond the main cast. Zeb Orrelios, as mentioned, appears in live action. For fans of Star Wars Rebels, the animated series that ran from 2014 to 2018 and told the story of a small rebel cell during the years between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope, Zeb is a beloved character. He is a Lasat, a large, furry species with retractable claws and enormous physical strength. Zeb Orrelios appears in live-action form Tom's Guide. Zeb already made a live-action cameo at the end of The Mandalorian Season 3, so his presence in the film is not a complete surprise for show viewers. but seeing him in a full theatrical context, with the full resources of Lucasfilm's practical and digital effects behind him, is a genuine treat. Dave Filoni himself appears as Trapper Wolf, the New Republic X-Wing pilot character he has played in The Mandalorian since its first season. There is something appropriate about the architect of this era of Star Wars storytelling placing himself in the story as a pilot, a relatively humble role for someone who has actually shaped the narrative at every level. The film's official trailer confirmed that Steve Blum was reprising his role as the voice of Zeb. Martin Scorsese was providing the voice of an Ardenian shopkeeper. The Clone Wars character Embo would appear, and Jabba the Hutt's twin cousins from the Book of Boba Fett would also be returning. Wikipedia. The inclusion of Embo, a bounty hunter from the Clone Wars animated series, is another gift to fans of Filoni's broader work. Embo is a distinctive character, visually striking and physically formidable, who became a fan favorite during his appearances in the animated series. Seeing him in live action, rendered with the full capabilities of industrial light and magic, will be a moment that longtime fans respond to with genuine excitement. Jabba's twin cousins appearing connects the film to the Book of Boba Fett and to the broader Hutt clan storyline that the film's main mission involves. Their presence helps ground the Hutt related plot in the wider criminal underworld that the franchise has established, and it provides a visual shorthand for fans about the power structure within the Hutt clan that Rotta is being returned to. Every major franchise film today comes with a question of what it is setting up for the future. Is this film a complete story, or is it primarily an advertisement for the next installment? The Mandalorian and Grogu is, to its credit, a reasonably complete story in itself. The mission that begins the film reaches its conclusion. The characters are in a different place at the end than they were at the beginning, specifically Grogu, whose growth and development has progressed meaningfully. The immediate threat is dealt with, but the film is clearly not trying to close the book on Djarin and Grogu. It is a chapter, and it is explicitly followed by another chapter. Dave Filoni's untitled Mandalorian movie is noted as a sequel production. Screen Rant: the threads that this film leaves unresolved, the larger imperial remnant picture, the political situation of the New Republic, the mysteries of Grogu's full potential, the question of what Mandalore's future looks like now that the Darksaber is gone, these are all threads that will presumably be picked up by Filoni's follow-up. And the way the film ends, with warmth and resolution but with the clear sense of more to come, is exactly right for a franchise adventure film. You have given the audience a satisfying experience. You have not cheated them with a cliffhanger or deliberately withheld major plot elements to force them back for part 2. But you have left the characters in a world that continues beyond the credits, in a galaxy that is still moving and changing and full of stories yet to be told. There is also the broader Lucasfilm slate to consider. Filoni has been building his story about this era of Star Wars across multiple television shows and now across 2 theatrical films. Eventually, those threads connect to the events of The Force Awakens. The New Republic that Din and Grogu are helping to protect is the same New Republic that the First Order will eventually destroy in that film. The characters we love from the Mandalorian era are living in the decades that precede catastrophe. How much of that larger story Filoni's film will address remains to be seen. But there is a sense that the Mandalorian film series is building towards something, a payoff that brings together the various threads of this entire era into a coherent climactic story. The groundwork being laid here, the connections being established, the characters being positioned, is part of a larger design that Filoni has clearly been working on for years. Before we reach our absolute final thoughts, it is worth talking briefly about how this film was marketed and what its cultural presence felt like leading up to release. The marketing for The Mandalorian and Grogu was notably restrained about plot details. For months after the film was announced, almost nothing concrete about the story was revealed. This is increasingly rare in an era when studios often release trailers that essentially summarize the entire film. Disney chose to keep audiences in the dark about the specific mission, the villain's identity, the planets visited, and the key character moments. Thanks to the presentation at last year's Star Wars celebration in Japan, the more recent trailers, and a special screening of the first 25 minutes on May 4, we know some details of the film's plot. Rotten Tomatoes. The decision to screen the first 25 minutes on Star Wars Day, May 4th, was clever. It gave audiences a taste of the film's opening action while not revealing where the story ultimately goes. It was a confidence play. Look how good this opening is. Trust us about the rest. The trailers themselves focused heavily on spectacle, on the visual grandeur of IMAX sequences, on Grogu moments designed to be maximally endearing, and on hints of new characters and worlds. They communicated the film's tone and energy without spoiling its story. This is the right approach, and it created a genuine sense of anticipation and mystery in the months leading up to release. The merchandise, as always with Star Wars and especially with anything involving Grogu, was everywhere. Grogu has been one of the most commercially valuable characters in Disney's portfolio since 2019. Every toy store, every clothing shop, every coffee mug rack in every airport gift shop has had some form of Grogu on it for years. For the film's release, that merchandise presence reached a new peak. If it is unclear from all the merch and Burger King meals, Grogu is the galaxy's hottest asset and best special effect. The Detroit News. That line from a film review is both a compliment and a gentle criticism. It acknowledges that Grogu is genuinely remarkable as a character and as a technical creation, while also noting that the commercial machinery around him is so enormous that it can sometimes feel like the character exists to sell things rather than to tell stories. This is a legitimate tension in the franchise's relationship with its most beloved character. But it is also worth noting that Grogu has earned his cultural status. He is not popular simply because Disney made him available on every shopping shelf. He is popular because the character is genuinely good, because the writing and performance behind him have consistently made him someone audiences genuinely care about. The merchandise followed the love, even if it has sometimes seemed to get ahead of it. Since we have spent so much time with this film, it is useful to place it in the broader context of the theatrical Star Wars releases. The original trilogy remains the benchmark. A New Hope in 1977 was not just a great film. It was a cultural revolution, the moment when science fiction stopped being considered a niche interest and became the dominant mode of mainstream popular entertainment. The Empire Strikes Back in 1980 deepened everything and is still considered by many to be the single greatest Star Wars film and one of the greatest sequels in cinema history. Return of the Jedi in 1983 completed the story with genuine emotional power, even if it fell slightly short of its predecessors. The prequel trilogy, beginning with The Phantom Menace in 1999, was a more complicated affair. Enthusiastically received by some fans, deeply disappointing to others, the prequels have since been largely rehabilitated in cultural perception, particularly among audiences who grew up with them. Revenge of the Sith, in particular, is now recognized as a genuinely powerful film with real dramatic ambition. The sequel trilogy started with The Force Awakens in 2015, which was exciting and crowd pleasing but criticized by some for playing it too safe. The Last Jedi in 2017 was the most divisive Star Wars film ever made, loved by critics and some fans for its ambition, deeply rejected by others for the directions it took beloved characters. The Rise of Skywalker in 2019 tried to course correct and mostly satisfied nobody. The anthology films Rogue One in 2016 and Solo in 2018 sit in interesting positions. Rogue One is now considered among the very best Star Wars films, praised for its grounded tone and its willingness to end on a note of tragedy. Solo is more complicated, a film that suffered from troubled production and a difficult marketing environment, but that many fans have come to appreciate more warmly in the years since its release. Where does The Mandalorian and Grogu fit in this hierarchy? Based on the critical reception and audience reactions available at this point, it sits somewhere in the comfortable middle. It is better than The Phantom Menace or The Rise of Skywalker. It is not as transcendent as A New Hope or The Empire Strikes Back. It is roughly comparable to The Force Awakens as a warm, well crafted, crowd pleasing adventure that succeeds at what it is trying to do without particularly expanding the art of what Star Wars films can be. The closest comparison is actually Solo, a Star Wars story. This is comparable to Solo, a Star Wars story that had an $84 million domestic opener and earned $213 million domestically, which is about 54% of its worldwide haul. ComingSoon.net. The comparison to Solo is apt in several ways. Both are films built around beloved characters from the franchise's history that were originally associated with a television adjacent format before being brought to the big screen. Both have been positioned as the beginning of a new direction for the franchise rather than a definitive chapter of the main saga. Both have been received with a mix of appreciation and mild disappointment. And both are significantly better films than their mixed critical reception suggests. Character analysis. Now let us go deeper into the characters themselves, beyond the plot, into who these people are and what they mean. Djarin, the Mandalorian, is one of the most interesting male protagonists in modern popular culture precisely because of his silence and his armor. He is a character who expresses almost everything through action rather than words. He does not give speeches. He does not explain his feelings. He does not process his trauma in conversations. He processes it by showing up, by protecting, by doing what needs to be done. He is the cinematic heir to the classic Western hero, the man of few words who rides into town, solves the problem, and rides out again. But the television show and this film complicated that archetype in a beautiful way by giving him Grogu. Because you cannot maintain perfect emotional distance when there is a tiny baby looking at you with those enormous dark eyes. You cannot stay the lone gunman when someone needs feeding, needs comfort, needs to be held. Grogu forced Din Djarin to become human in a way that no battle or crisis ever could. Pedro Pascal brings enormous warmth to this role while remaining entirely behind a helmet for nearly the entire film. This is a genuine acting challenge. You cannot show your face, you cannot use your eyes. You have to convey everything through body language, through the tilt of a head, through the placement of a hand on a child's head. Pascal has mastered this. There is a scene of him just sitting near Grogu, not doing anything dramatic, and you can feel the love in his posture. It is remarkable craft. Pascal returns as Djarin, both in voice and body, a relative rarity. As the actor's schedule means, the Mando suit is often worn by actors Lateef Crowder and Brendan Wayne. The pair were even credited alongside Pascal in The Mandalorian's third season. They also return for the film. This is worth appreciating. Most people watching the film have no idea that in many of the action sequences, the person inside the Mandalorian suit is not Pedro Pascal. It is Brendan Wayne who handles the character's movement and posture and physical presence, or Lateef Crowder who performs the more extreme stunt work. And yet, the character feels absolutely cohesive because all three of these performers have internalized who Din Djarin is so completely. Grogu is perhaps the most technically remarkable character in this film. He is created through a combination of animatronics, puppetry, and digital visual effects. He is not fully digital. He has physical reality in many scenes. Grogu is created with animatronics and puppetry, augmented with visual effects. Producer Kathleen Kennedy said the character was a perfect example of a character that has to emote and you have to feel connected to without hearing them speak. Grogu does not talk. He has never spoken a word in English or in any other language in the entire history of The Mandalorian. He makes sounds, he reacts, he uses expressions. He communicates through action and physicality. And yet audiences feel like they know him completely, feel like they understand what he is thinking and feeling in every scene. That is the miracle of this character's creation. It is the work of the puppeteers and animatronic operators who give him physical life, the visual effects artists who augment that life digitally, the sound designers who create his voice, and the writers who place him in situations where his personality can emerge through behavior rather than dialogue. Colonel Ward, played by Sigourney Weaver, is unfortunately underused in the film. The roles played by Sigourney Weaver and Martin Scorsese are far too short, but both add to the film's narrative. Weaver is one of the greatest science fiction icons in movie history. Her presence automatically lends weight and credibility to any film she appears in, and she clearly brings something real to Colonel Ward. The character is a veteran, someone who has seen the worst of the Empire's cruelty and who has dedicated her life to preventing its return. There is gravity in how Ward speaks, in her body language, in the careful, precise way she lays out missions for Djarin. She is not a bureaucrat. She is a warrior who has moved into a leadership role while never forgetting what she fought for. But the film does not give her enough screen time to fully develop this character. She appears primarily in the briefing scenes at the beginning and in connective tissue throughout the story. We never get a scene that truly explores who she is beyond her professional function. This is one of the film's genuine missed opportunities. With an actress of Weaver's caliber, there was a chance to create a truly memorable new Star Wars character. Instead, Ward remains impressive but underdeveloped. The Mandalorian and Grogu is not a film that wears its themes on its sleeve in an obvious way. It is first and foremost an adventure story, but there are real ideas flowing underneath the action. The most central theme, as we have discussed at length, is fatherhood and what it means to choose family. Djarin did not have to save Grogu. He did not have to give up everything to protect him. He chose to, and that choice, made again and again under pressure, in danger, at great cost, is what defines him as a character and as a father. Grogu did not have to choose to return to Djarin when Luke Skywalker offered him Jedi training. He could have become a powerful Jedi. He chose love and belonging instead. The film reinforces this theme through Rotta's storyline. Rotta the Hutt is dealing with what it means to be someone's child, to carry a name that is not entirely your own, to want to be seen as yourself rather than as a continuation or reflection of your parent. The film asks, what do we inherit from those who came before us? And how do we honor that inheritance while also becoming our own people? There is also a theme about the cost of peace. The empire has fallen, but peace did not automatically arrive. Stability is not a gift. It has to be maintained, worked for, protected every single day. The new republic is young and fragile. The people who fought to create it now have to do the ongoing, unglamorous work of defending it. Djarin is part of that work. He has moved from being a lone mercenary to being a guardian of something larger than himself. This connects to a classical idea in mythology and folklore. The hero who wins the great battle must then become the person who keeps the peace. The warrior must become something more than a warrior. He must become a protector, a builder, someone invested in what comes next rather than only in the immediate fight. There is also something quietly profound in the recurring visual of Grogu and Djarin simply existing together, eating together, traveling together, looking at the same stars. In a franchise that is often about grand stakes and galaxy scale conflicts, these small moments of simple togetherness carry enormous emotional weight. They say this is what you fight for, not victory in the abstract, but the ability to share a meal with someone you love, the ability to watch your child grow, the ability to come home, filmmaking, technical craft, and visual style. Jon Favreau's direction is confident and clear throughout. He has a very straightforward visual style. He is not an auteur in the flashy, stylistically distinctive sense. He does not fill every frame with visual metaphors or use unusual camera angles to create unease. He is more in the tradition of classic Hollywood entertainment directors like Spielberg and Howard Hawks, directors who understood that the best storytelling is invisible, where the craft serves the story rather than calling attention to itself. The rhythm of Favreau's film resembles Star Wars, The Force Awakens, in that it flows seamlessly from scene to scene and hardly endures a lull. That changes unfortunately at the beginning of a third act that grinds to a halt before eventually kicking into gear again. This is a fair observation. The film is very well paced for most of its runtime. It moves briskly, confidently from one set piece to the next. The editing by Rachel Goodlett-Katz, who also worked on The Mandalorian's third season, maintains a rhythm that keeps the action engaging without becoming exhausting. But there is a real pause in momentum as the third act begins before building back up to the climax. It is noticeable the film was shot in the anamorphic format at a 2:39 to 1 aspect ratio. This is the widescreen ratio associated with epic cinema, with Lawrence of Arabia and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and countless other landmark widescreen films. It means the image is very wide, giving the cinematographer room to show vast landscapes and big action sequences in their full scope. Cinematographer David Klein, who has worked extensively with Favreau, makes excellent use of this format. The IMAX version of the film, which plays with an even larger aspect ratio for certain sequences, is apparently particularly impressive. The IMAX intro for the film is set in space and in a Mandalorian forge where Grogu forges a few of the countdown numbers. This is a playful and charming touch that sets the tone perfectly. Even the studio countdown before the film begins has been Mandalorianized, with Grogu himself participating. It is an invitation to the audience to have fun. The sound design deserves attention. Star Wars has always been a franchise defined by iconic sounds. The lightsaber hum, the R2D2 bleeps, the TIE fighter scream. The Mandalorian television show added the particular metallic ring of Beskar armor being struck, the specific audio identity of Din Djarin's weapons and ship. This film expands that sonic vocabulary while staying true to what came before. The space battles feel genuinely three-dimensional in theaters with proper sound systems. The creature attacks carry visceral weight through their sound design as much as their visual rendering. And then there is Ludwig Göransson's score. The standout is the music. Composed by Ludwig Göransson, who wrote the original theme for The Mandalorian, the score builds on what we already know but adds so much to the film's narrative. Göransson's Mandalorian theme is genuinely one of the greatest pieces of music written for a franchise property in recent memory. It is built around a specific instrument sound, a resonant, slightly eerie, string-like timbre that you cannot quite place, that feels alien and ancient at the same time. It communicates something essential about who Din Djarin is. It is lonesome but not sad, strong but not aggressive. It is the sound of a man who walks alone but walks with purpose. This is mostly non-stop action that is elevated by another astonishing score from Ludwig Göransson that perfectly encapsulates the epicness being strived for and the atmosphere of each varied locale, complete with a synth-heavy tune fitting in with the nightlife depicted in the gladiatorial combat space run by criminals. Göransson tailors his music to each environment the film visits. The icy plains sequences have a stark, minimal quality. The Hutt homeworld sequences have something darker and more humid in the sound, something that makes you feel the oppressive atmosphere of that place. The gladiatorial arena has the kind of propulsive, driving music that gets your pulse up. And the intimate father-son moments have something quieter and more tender that draws directly from the emotional DNA of the television show. The score was recorded at the Fox Studio lot in Los Angeles over 2 weeks in January 2026 using a full orchestra. There is something appropriate about recording at the Fox lot, which has one of the great Hollywood scoring stages and a long history of film music legends having worked there. The visual effects are a mixed picture, as several critics have noted. The action scenes and visuals received some criticism. ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, the legendary visual effects company founded by George Lucas, handles the effects work here as they always do for Star Wars. And there is genuinely impressive work in this film, particularly in creature creation and in the large-scale space sequences. But there are also moments where things look slightly less polished than they might. Some of the digital environments lack the tactile quality that the best Star Wars visuals achieve. When you compare certain scenes to, say, the battle sequences in Andor, There is occasionally a flatness to the digital backgrounds that breaks the immersion slightly. This is a small complaint in the context of a film that is visually ambitious and mostly succeeds, but it is worth noting because Star Wars on the big screen after 7 years invites comparison to the very best the franchise has offered visually. The creature work, however, is consistently excellent. Many of the characters in The Mandalorian and Grogu have been brought to life by the wizards of industrial light and magic, along with legacy effects, who have done a wonderful job of almost seamless integration with the other real life actors and environments. Legacy Effects is the practical effects company that creates physical makeup, prosthetics, and animatronics, and their work here, particularly on Grogu and on the various alien creatures throughout the film, is consistently impressive. Critical response and audience reaction. So, how did the world respond to The Mandalorian and Grogu once it was actually released? The tomatometer sits at 60% based on 103 reviews. That is a mixed critical reception by any measure. It is not the critical failure that some of the sequel trilogy entries became. But it is also not the overwhelming critical success that Rogue One or the early seasons of the television show received. It sits in a middle zone that reflects genuine division among critics. The positive reviews tend to praise the film's energy, its fun, its action, and the central performances. They argue that it delivers exactly what it promises, a rousing adventure featuring two characters people love, and that asking for more than that is missing the point. Reviews thus far have been mixed, and after viewing the film, I totally get it. The Mandalorian and Grogu does not add anything to the lore, and it is essentially just an extended episode of the TV show. If you can get past this, I was surprised by how much fun I had with this movie. It wastes no time getting going with Imperial walkers in the opening scene and plenty of action throughout the mostly brisk runtime. The Mandalorian and Grogu is genuinely delightful to watch. It is funny, sweet, very emotional at times, and full of action and adventure. The negative reviews, or at least the more skeptical ones, focus on the film's story limitations. The complaint that comes up most consistently is that this feels like 3 or 4 very good episodes of a television show assembled into a theatrical feature rather than something that truly justifies the big screen format. This is not a movie that wraps up an ongoing cinematic narrative, but essentially 2.5 episodes of a TV show strung together and released to theaters, where Disney Plus subscribers do not even get a discount on tickets, much less a freebie. That is a pointed and fair criticism. When you charge people theatrical ticket prices for something that feels like elevated television content, there is a legitimate question about the value proposition. The first theatrical X-Files movie, which the same Roger Ebert review referenced, faced a similar question when it came out while the show was still running in 1998. Particularly critical audiences may even find that the film feels like multiple big budget episodes of the show strung together, although it overlooks the cinematic qualities and technical achievements of the film. The most negative critics pointed to the story's relatively low stakes and its failure to meaningfully advance the broader Star Wars mythology. By the time Star Wars The Mandalorian and Grogu ends, nothing of significance has happened for the series or franchise. That is perhaps the harshest verdict on the film, and it captures a real tension at the heart of the project. Favreau and Filoni deliberately chose to make a self-contained adventure that did not depend on broader franchise knowledge and did not massively alter the status quo. That was a deliberate creative choice, designed to make the film accessible to new audiences and to avoid the weight of expectation that comes with franchise-defining narratives. But in making that choice, they also produced a film that passionate fans might find somewhat unsatisfying in terms of what it adds to the universe they love. The audience response has been more enthusiastic than the critical response, which is not unusual for Star Wars films. Fans who loved Djarin and Grogu were always going to respond more warmly to a film that celebrates those characters than critics who are evaluating it as cinema in the abstract. Early audience reactions coming out of screenings have been very positive, with people describing it as the most fun they have had at a Star Wars movie in years. The Mandalorian and Grogu was not anywhere near as bad as I expected, with plenty of action set pieces and fun character moments. I like how it does not rely on nostalgia bait but does its own thing in the Star Wars universe. It may be aimed at a younger audience, but I just let my inner child take over and enjoyed the ride. The box office situation for the film was still developing at the time of this writing, as the film officially opens on the 22nd of May 2026. But the premiere on May 14 generated enormous press and the advance ticket sales had been very strong. Pre sales suggested a very healthy opening weekend, potentially one of the biggest of the year. Whether it will have the legs to sustain multiple weeks in theaters in the way that blockbusters that generate strong repeat viewings do remain to be seen. The IMAX format specifically was expected to perform very well. The film was shot with IMAX in mind throughout, and the large format experience is one of the genuine differentiators between seeing it in a theater and watching it at home on Disney Plus. For audiences who want the biggest, loudest, most immersive experience possible, IMAX is clearly the right choice for this film. To fully appreciate The Mandalorian and Grogu, you also need to understand the context in which it arrives. Star Wars as a theatrical franchise has had a troubled recent history. The sequel trilogy ended in 2019 with The Rise of Skywalker, which disappointed many fans and performed below expectations at the box office. Since then, Disney has been cautious about Star Wars on the big screen, preferring to invest in streaming content. There were multiple theatrical Star Wars projects announced over the years that never materialized. Directors attached and then departed. Stories planned and then abandoned. The decision to bring The Mandalorian and Grogu to theaters represents a calculated bet. Rather than trying to launch an entirely new theatrical saga with new characters and new mythology, Disney chose to build on characters that already have a proven, passionate fan base. Din Djarin and Grogu were the most popular Star Wars characters of the streaming era. Their story was unfinished. Bringing them to the big screen was the safest possible approach to rebooting Star Wars theatrically. Whether it was too safe is one of the questions the film leaves open. Some critics and fans would argue that Star Wars needs to take bigger risks, needs to trust audiences with more challenging stories and less familiar territory. The Mandalorian and Grogu does not take that kind of risk. It is warm, it is accessible, it is entertaining, it is exactly what it says on the label. But it does not push the franchise anywhere genuinely new. The comparison to The Force Awakens is instructive here. That film was also criticized by some for being too safe, too similar to A New Hope in its story structure, too reliant on familiar beats and nostalgic callbacks. But it also successfully reintroduced Star Wars to a new generation of audiences and set up years of new storytelling. Perhaps The Mandalorian and Grogu will be looked back on in a similar way. Not as the best Star Wars film ever made, but as the one that brought the franchise back to theaters successfully and opened the door for more ambitious stories to follow. During an earnings call in February 2024, Disney CEO Bob Iger said the film would start a new slate of Star Wars films. That is the key phrase, a new slate. This film is not just its own story, it is a foundation, a proof of concept. If it succeeds financially, if audiences return to theaters for Star Wars in sufficient numbers, it opens the door for everything that comes next. More films set in this era, more films featuring these characters. Perhaps films that take greater creative risks precisely because this one proved there is an audience ready and willing to show up. Dave Filoni, who co-wrote this film and now serves as co-CEO of Lucasfilm, has been building a coherent universe in the streaming era that includes The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, Ahsoka, and Skeleton Crew. These shows all exist in the same timeline roughly 5 years after Return of the Jedi. They are all moving towards something. The Ahsoka series was building toward a confrontation with Grand Admiral Thrawn that has enormous implications for the galaxy. The threads of that larger story are clearly going to continue in future Star Wars content, including presumably in the second Mandalorian movie that Filoni will direct. The Razor Crest is back with a new upgrade, and familiar faces like Zeb Orrelios appear in live action form. The return of the Razor Crest, Din Djarin's iconic ship that was destroyed in season 2 of the television show, is a moment that will thrill fans enormously. It has clearly been rebuilt or replaced with an upgraded version, and seeing it back in action on the big screen feels like something of a homecoming. Zeb Orrelios appearing in live action is similarly significant. Zeb is a beloved character from the Star Wars Rebels animated series, voiced by Steve Blum. He appeared briefly in live action form at the end of season 3 of The Mandalorian, but this film gives him a more substantial presence. Seeing animated characters rendered in live action is always a delicate proposition, but the fan response to Zeb's appearance has been enthusiastic. One thing that is worth spending time on is what kind of film this is in terms of its audience. The film is rated PG-13, which in America means it is suitable for children over 13, but that younger children may need parental guidance. In practice, this film is clearly intended as a family film, but one that does not condescend to its audience the way some family films do. The PG-13 rating comes primarily from action violence. Things explode, characters get hurt, there are moments that might be scary for very young children. But there is nothing morally troubling, nothing that romanticizes real world harm, nothing that sexualizes anyone or presents adult themes in ways that would be inappropriate for teenagers and mature children. What the film does brilliantly is offer multiple levels of engagement simultaneously. For very young children, Grogu is endlessly delightful. His expressions, his attempts to eat everything, his small victories, his evident love for Din Djarin, these are the kinds of things that children find irresistible. You do not need to understand any Star Wars lore to enjoy watching Grogu be Grogu. For teenagers and young adults who grew up with the television show, the film is a continuation of a story they care about. It delivers the emotional payoffs and character moments they have been waiting for. It expands the world they love. For older adults who saw the original trilogy in theaters, the film is a respectful, loving tribute to everything that made Star Wars great: the adventure, the creatures, the sound of lightsabers, the moral clarity of good versus evil, the warmth of found family. It connects to the original trilogy in its setting and themes without being dominated by nostalgia. This multi generational appeal is one of the franchise's great strengths, and Favreau and Filoni have navigated it skillfully. As we approach the conclusion of this deep dive, let us think about where The Mandalorian and Grogu leaves the Star Wars franchise and what it means for what comes next. The film establishes that there is an unfinished story here. The Imperial remnants are still active, the galaxy is still unstable, Din Djarin and Grogu are still at work. And there are larger forces, greater threats that this film gestures toward without fully addressing. Dave Filoni's untitled follow-up film is the next step. That film will presumably deal with the bigger picture, with Grand Admiral Thrawn, with the connections to the Ahsoka storyline, with the political and military state of the galaxy as it moves toward the era of the First Order that begins in The Force Awakens. Filoni has been building toward these larger stories for years across his television work. The theatrical canvas will give him the resources to bring those stories to their proper scale. The decision to tell the next chapter under Filoni's direction is interesting. Favreau is an exceptional craftsman and producer, but Filoni is the true architect of this era of Star Wars storytelling. He has an encyclopedic knowledge of the entire franchise, having worked with George Lucas directly on the Clone Wars. He understands how all the pieces fit together. His film will presumably be the one that pays off the bigger narrative promises. In the meantime, The Mandalorian and Grogu stands as a warm, energetic, emotionally genuine adventure film that delivers what its fans needed most. It proved that Star Wars belongs in theaters. It reminded audiences of why they fell in love with this galaxy in the first place, and it left Din, Djarin, and Grogu in a place from which their story can continue to grow. Conclusion and final thoughts. So, after all of this, after the plot walkthrough and character analysis and thematic exploration and filmmaking discussion, what is the final verdict on Star Wars, The Mandalorian and Grogu? The truth is that this film is exactly what it was built to be. It is not the most ambitious Star Wars story ever told. It is not a groundbreaking piece of cinema that challenges the form. It is not trying to be. It is a warm, exciting, visually impressive adventure about a man and his tiny green son navigating a dangerous galaxy and choosing each other over and over again. If you come to this film having watched and loved the Mandalorian television show, you will almost certainly have a wonderful time. The characters you love are here. The relationships you invested in are honored. The world you know is expanded. The action is bigger and more spectacular than anything the show could deliver. The emotional moments are earned, and the score, as always with Göransson, is extraordinary. If you come to this film as a casual Star Wars fan or as someone who is not deeply familiar with the television series, you will likely still have a good time. Favreau made genuine efforts to ensure the film works as a stand-alone experience. The story is self-contained enough to follow without prior knowledge. The characters introduce themselves naturally through their actions. If you come to this film hoping for a franchise defining epic, a story that reshapes what Star Wars means and sends it off in bold new directions, you will probably be disappointed. This is not that film. It is content to be a very good adventure story rather than a great piece of cinema. It is glorious high adventure that, like the original Star Wars trilogy, is both accessible and visually daring. That description from one of the more enthusiastic reviews captures something real. There is a spirit here, a genuine joy in the adventure, a love of the genre and the world that connects directly to why the original Star Wars worked in 1977 and why it still matters nearly 50 years later. The Mandalorian and Grogu is not the best Star Wars film. It may not even be the best Star Wars content of this era, but it is good. It is fun. It is made by people who care deeply about these characters and this universe. And at a time when major blockbuster franchises are struggling to reconnect with audiences who have grown tired and skeptical, there is real value in a film that simply delivers what people came to see. Pedro Pascal is magnetic, Grogu is irresistible, the music is magnificent, the action is satisfying. And at the heart of it all, in every quiet moment between the explosions and the blaster fire, there is a genuine story about love and family and what we protect and why we protect it. This is a film focused on Din Djarin and Grogu, and it delivers on that point.